Cartoon Network Superstar Soccer. Cartoon Network Superstar Soccer sounds like the kind of cross-universe spectacle that should get people talking. Every character the network owns, united on a single pitch, competing for glory. Then you see the actual full title, Cartoon Network Superstar Soccer Goal. And the ambition collapses before you even load the game. This was a mobile game released August 24th, 2016, developed for Android, iOS, and Amazon devices, and its actual design had nothing to do with crossover mechanics in any structural sense. The game featured multiple characters from across Cartoon Network's roster, including Ben Tennyson and Steven. 4. The entire roster. The gameplay depended on two minigame formats, Flipbook and Car Smash, that were pure 2000s arcade content with no connection to any fictional universe interaction whatsoever. And it released for Android, iOS, and Amazon devices, which meant it was competing for attention against every other casual soccer game in the App Store, rather than existing as a meaningful entry in the Ben 10 Alien Force franchise or any other CN property's continuity. That is the small version of the problem. Here's the larger one. Cartoon Network Superstar Soccer was not a one-off experiment. Turner Broadcasting was actively moving its existing properties into whatever mobile genre was commercially viable in the late 2000s, and soccer was that genre. The CN branding was applied to an existing mobile soccer template, not built around the properties themselves. What would need to be true for the ordinary explanation to hold? You would need actual narrative integration between distinct fictional properties, characters from separate universes interacting in a way that changes or enriches their stories. You would need a roster large enough to justify the framing. You would need gameplay mechanics that depended on the crossover rather than using it as a skin. Superstar Soccer met none of those conditions. The character roster maxed out at 4. The mechanics were borrowed wholesale from genres that had nothing to do with the CN brands on the cover. There was no story, no world building, no interaction beyond the superficial fact that 4 recognizable designs shared a pitch. A crossover requires the fiction to matter to the mechanics, and the fiction here didn't matter at all. Nobody investigated it because nobody needed to. It was what it appeared to be, which was a Turner Broadcasting mobile soccer title that used existing CN character designs because licensing them was cheaper than creating original ones. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which crossover you think was the most substantial. Let's get back into it. FusionFall, Worlds Collide. At least Cartoon Network Superstar Soccer had a public-facing rationale that held together on its own commercial terms. Turner Broadcasting was rotating its properties into whatever mobile genre was paying that quarter, and soccer was the genre. Worlds Collide has no such fig leaf to hide behind. This was a comic released in 2009 as the direct prequel to the FusionFall MMO, and the MMO it preceded had assembled a persistent open world bringing together multiple Cartoon Network properties, a persistent open world where every major CN property coexisted under a unified post-apocalyptic framework. Worlds Collide was the narrative setup for all of it, released as a prequel manga to FusionFall, which gave it a mainstream credibility and distribution reach that Western franchise prequel comics almost never achieved. The comic served as canonical backstory for the FusionFall MMO crossover, which is a remarkable positioning for a Western animated crossover prequel. The format is where the structural problem becomes impossible to ignore. A comic is a bounded medium, panels, page counts, a fixed narrative spine, and Worlds Collide was built to serve readers who may or may not ever log into the actual MMO. It had to establish the apocalypse, introduce the threat, assemble the heroes, and point toward the game's launch, all within the structural limits of a serialized manga chapter count. Compared to what a direct-to-animation prequel could accomplish, running time, the voice talent of the original shows, the ability to show a living world rather than to describe it in static panels, this comic reads like a compressed pitch for content the reader has to go somewhere else to fully experience. FusionFall's crossover existed in 3 dimensions, with persistent player presence making character interactions feel genuinely unscripted and emergent. Worlds Collide had to simulate that entire experience in bounded panels, carrying the weight of canonical backstory for a universe it could never actually show in motion. What the comic proved That a prequel manga could serve as canonical backstory for an MMO crossover was genuinely interesting as a publishing experiment, particularly given that it was a Western franchise finding distribution through one of the world's most influential Japanese manga magazines. What it could not do was match the scope of the universe it was introducing readers to, or answer the question of why a story this tightly bound to the game's actual events was being told outside the game in the first place. Cartoon Network, super secret crisis war. And if a comic prequel felt like small stakes, this blows the doors off that framing entirely. A 6-issue comic book miniseries crossover event published by IDW Publishing, written by Louise Simonson with art by Derek Charm, that pulled Ben 10 from Ben 10, Omniverse, into a multiversal conspiracy far beyond anything a video game ever attempted. Ben 10 joined a main heroic lineup alongside Dexter, Samurai Jack, the Powerpuff Girls, and the Eds from Ed, and Eddie, every one of them pulled from across the Cartoon Network canon into a single coordinated strike force. The villain coalition assembled against them makes the threat explicitly planetary in scope. Aku, Vilgax, Mandark, and Mojo Jojo all working together, all with a concrete plan that went beyond capturing a single world. Their objective was conquest of the multiverse itself, and their weapon of choice was an army of robot mechas, manufactured, mechanized, built for mass invasion across every dimension the heroes called home. IDW Publishing held the license for Cartoon Network comics properties, including Ben 10 at the time, which is the reason this crossover existed in this form at all. The multiverse stands entirely unprotected against 4 of animation's most persistent villains operating in coordination. Nobody in the lineup had faced a threat structured quite like this. Robot mechas designed to march through dimensional rifts and overwhelm each hero's home turf simultaneously, meaning no single fighter could hold the line alone even if they wanted to. Dexter's science, Samurai Jack's sword, the Powerpuff Girls' combined firepower, the Eds whatever it is that they do, all of it stretched thin across an incursion that moved on multiple fronts at once. The scope of the operation forced the kind of inter-team dependency that crossover events promise, but rarely deliver, and the villain roster ensured every hero brought a specific weakness the coalition was built to exploit. Some might say that a comic book event, however multiversal, can't generate real stakes because nothing that happens between covers echoes back into the animated series. That argument misses the point entirely. This crossover wasn't trying to rewrite the animated canon. It was exploring what these characters look like when the pressure is cranked far higher than their individual shows ever allow, and IDW's license specifically covered these properties, giving the writers access to official characterizations and histories that fanfiction could never touch. The result is a crossover that respects the source material's internal logic while still pushing into territory no single series could sustain on its own. What actually happened here is that IDW Publishing held the Cartoon Network comics license, and that single structural fact determined everything about how this crossover was built, who appeared in it, and what form the threat took. The comic medium dictated a 6-issue arc with a defined villain coalition, a multiversal objective, and a heroic lineup curated from the properties IDW was contractually allowed to use. This wasn't an organic creative decision, it was a licensed crossover shaped entirely by the boundaries of the publishing deal, which is why it reads the way it does and why it exists at exactly this moment in the franchise timeline. FusionFall. A living planet made of green goo had already begun consuming Earth, and the game that answered that threat was nothing less than a massively multiplayer online role-playing game co-developed by Cartoon Network alongside Korean studio Grigon Entertainment. Where the crossover wasn't a comic book event or a TV special, but an entire persistent world where anime-style versions of Cartoon Network characters stood alongside players as active participants in the fight. Planet Fusion's method of attack was biological and total. The planet absorbed matter and reshaped it, turning everything it touched into more of itself, and the only defense was a coordinated response across every region of the globe simultaneously. Players weren't spectators to that response, they were it, operating in a shared space with dozens of other people, all of them receiving direct support from anime-style versions of characters from Cartoon Network series. The roster was enormous, the setting was alive, And the entire progression system inverted every assumption anyone brought from traditional role-playing games. The progression system was Nanos, miniature versions of Cartoon Network characters gained on level up instead of stat bonuses, with 3 equipped at all times as your active loadout. This wasn't a minor mechanical quirk. It replaced the standard RPG loop of earning strength, agility, or intelligence points with a system where every power increase was also a character choice, a fandom expression, and a miniature roster-building exercise all at once. 3 nanos at a time meant every decision about what to equip carried weight. And the pool of available nanos, drawn from every corner of the Cartoon Network library, meant the combinatorial possibilities were enormous before a single enemy was encountered. The game didn't just let you play as a Cartoon Network character in cosmetic skin form, it made collecting and composing them the entire backbone of character growth. The objection writes itself. This game allegedly launched as free-to-play, and if something costs nothing to enter, the argument goes, the design must be thin, the progression padded, the real content locked behind a paywall that the free layer teases but never delivers. That objection has a kernel of truth. FusionFall did transition off free access on April 19th, 2010, roughly 6 months after launch, and the shift to a paid model signals that the free layer couldn't sustain the game's operating costs. But that shift doesn't prove the underlying design was shallow. It proves that maintaining a persistent world with real-time multiplayer infrastructure and a library of licensed characters is expensive regardless of how smart the progression system is. The Nanos mechanic wasn't a cheap substitute for stat bonuses. It was a deliberate design inversion that happened to require the same server resources as any other MMORPG. What was actually happening the whole time was that Cartoon Network had built a genuine, massively multiplayer crossover, not a themed skin for an existing engine, but a game whose entire identity depended on the collision between Cartoon Network's character library and the structural demands of persistent online worlds. The Nanos system was the proof. 3 slots, filled by miniature heroes, no traditional stats, progression measured entirely in character collection and tactical composition. That's not a gimmick layered onto something else. That's the game's actual spine. And it's why FusionFall still has a player base that remembers it specifically, long after the servers went dark. Alien X-Tinction. Where the previous entry left a world locked behind a subscription wall, this one blew the door off its own continuity entirely. Alien X-Tinction arrived in 2021 as a movie-length special and the final episode of the Ben 10 reboot continuity, serving as a crossover with the classic continuity and a tribute to it. The 2021 specials, Alien X-Tinction among them, serve simultaneously as the series finale for the 2016 reboot and as the connective tissue between that reboot's timeline and everything that came before it. It premiered through HBO Max, carried the genre tags kids and family, action, cartoons, and family adventures, and featured voice work from Tara Strong and Montserrat Hernandez, the kind of casting that signals a production treating this as a canonical event, not filler. The plot centers on the Tennysons coming under attack from a villainous dimension-hopping alien called Alien X, and the escalation that follows is where the crossover logic actually arrives. A parallel universe version of Max opens a door, and through it come multiple versions of Ben and multiple versions of Gwen, assembled as an alien hero army drawn from across the multiverse. That assembly is the mechanism by which 2 previously separate continuities occupy the same story at the same time, not as a timeline merge or a reboot handoff, but as an active multiversal crisis that requires every version of the family to show up and fight together. The specialist objection lands here naturally. A board game should not be able to do what a season-long arc takes 50 episodes to accomplish, and a one-off television special should not carry the weight of a series finale and a crossover event simultaneously without collapsing under the pressure. Alien X-Tinction answers that objection by being exactly what its format allows it to be, a self-contained story with the narrative authority of a finale and the multiversal scope of a crossover, because television is the one medium in this franchise's history that has always been allowed to rewrite the rules. The Secret Saturdays and Ben 10 have been in the same universe since the original series first aired, with multiple enemies appearing in both properties. What it proves about this category as a whole is that crossovers in this franchise only stick when they happen on the same medium that birthed the characters in the first place. Games come and go, comics get rebooted, but a television special with series finale status is a permanent record. Alien X-Tinction didn't just connect two continuities, it encoded that connection into the franchise's official ending, which means every subsequent reference to the 2016 reboot's events now exists in a timeline that knows about the classic one. Ben 10 2016, the Secret Saturdays crossover. The Ben 10 2016 reboot ran its third season in 2018, and somewhere in that season, an episode appeared that treated a relationship as established fact that had never been established anywhere. The Secret Saturdays ran for 2 years from 2008 to 2010 and was revealed to share the same universe as Ben 10. It presented the Secret Saturdays as a related show to the Ben 10 franchise alongside Generator Rex, and wrote the crossover as though the two properties had always occupied the same world. That framing inverted the rule the reboot had operated under since its first episode. The 2016 series was set in a new continuity, separate from the classic continuity, deliberately isolated from everything that came before it, and here it was casually referencing a show that wasn't even part of the classic continuity to begin with. The Secret Saturdays had finished its original run 3 years before the Omniverse crossover episode aired. The timeline is where this stopped being a curiosity and started being a problem. By the time the Omniverse Season 3 premiere TGIES aired in 2013, the Secret Saturdays had been off the air for 3 years. Treating an unrelated concluded series as a franchise neighbor didn't expand the world, it collapsed the boundary the reboot had been carefully constructing around itself. The viewer's instinctive question is whether this is just an Easter egg, a throwaway reference, or a shallow name drop disguised as a crossover, and the answer is that it was none of those things. The Secret Saturdays aired for 2 years across its original run, built a full mythology around a family of cryptid hunters, and developed a fan base that recognized it as a distinct property with its own internal logic. When the Ben 10 2016 reboot acknowledged it as a related show rather than a guest property, it wasn't paying tribute, it was redrawing the map of what counted as part of the franchise's extended universe. What this reveals about the larger system is that crossovers in animated series function as continuity claims, not just storytelling devices. When a show references another show as a peer rather than a visitor, it's making a structural argument about how fictional worlds relate to each other, and that argument has consequences for every subsequent story told in either universe. The Secret Saturdays crossover didn't just connect two series, it established that the reboot's continuity was broader and more porous than its opening premise had suggested, opening a door that the finale then spent an entire special closing again. Brawlhalla. The Ben 10 crossover that followed a single TV handshake suddenly becomes a global event, the franchise touching every player on a platform with millions of active accounts. On June 10th, 2020, patch 4.02 went live carrying the Ben 10 event, a full crossover delivered through a partnership between Cartoon Network and Brawlhalla. 3 epic crossover characters arrived alongside it: Heatblast, Diamondhead, and 4 Arms. For a franchise that had spent 15 years confined to television and specials, guest spots, and mobile tie-ins, this was a leap in reach, a fighting game on PC and console, with crossplay, with Ben 10 baked directly into the roster. Here's where it gets strange. A fighting game crossover that adds 3 characters alongside a new morph game mode, a Galvan Prime map, a Vilgax KO effect, and an Omnitrix podium. Just the characters, their movesets, and a banner on the character select screen. Heatblast brings fire, Diamondhead brings crystal, 4 Arms brings brute strength, each one a recognizable piece of the Omnitrix early lineup, mechanically distinct enough to feel like a real addition rather than a reskin. The event ran as part of the standard patch cycle, no special marketing push, just the characters appearing in a game most Ben 10 fans had never heard of and most Brawlhalla players had never watched. The official explanation is the Cartoon Network partnership. That is not wrong, the date is correct, the patch number is correct, the characters are correct, the deal is real. But the official explanation is content with describing the structure and not curious about the texture, and the texture is the real story. Every other crossover in the Ben 10 canon before this one, even the smallest, involved at least the pretense of narrative. Ben went to another world, met other characters, faced a threat together, solved something. This one bypassed all of it. The transaction was purely transactional, 3 models, a store page, a revenue window. The gap between this and the Generator Rex special 8 years earlier is not just a difference in medium. It is a difference in what crossovers were allowed to be. What this actually shows is that the crossover has been quietly redefined. The old model, 2 shows share a universe, characters cross over, the event has weight because it exists inside a story, has given way to something thinner, brand adjacency. The characters appear because the brands are adjacent, not because the stories have anything to say to each other. The Ben 10 event in Brawlhalla is not a story about Ben Tennyson meeting other fighters. It is the visual of Ben Tennyson's name on a character select screen next to characters named Thor and Petra, and the only relationship any of them have is a copyright holder. A television special in 2011 had to justify its existence through plot. A patch in 2020 had to justify its existence through a spreadsheet. That shift is not a decline. Crossovers were never obligated to carry stories, but it is a meaningful change in what the audience is being offered and why the offering exists in the first place. Ben 10, Generator Rex, Heroes United. The crossover that preceded Brawlhalla was remote, mechanical, stripped of story. This one is none of those things. Ben 10, Generator Rex. Heroes United is an extended crossover special that takes the form of an extended episode of Generator Rex, airing as the season premiere of Generator Rex's 3rd and final season, a legitimate television broadcast event between 2 shows sharing a universe, produced for an audience watching in real time on Saturday morning. For a single half-hour slot, it collapsed 2 franchises created by the same studio into a single narrative. The hard number to hold on to is 1 extended episode, 1 broadcast, 1 crossover event, written by Man of Action, the creators of both series. That single number does more work than the marketing around it. A single episode written by the people who invented both worlds means no committee negotiation, no network notes diluting either character, no handoff between writing teams that didn't fully understand the source material. The crossover takes place entirely inside Generator Rex's world. Ben arrives as a visitor, and the entire encounter is structured as a Rex story that happens to have Ben in it. That structural choice, not a Ben 10 special guest starring Rex, but a Rex episode guest starring Ben, is the most specific thing about the whole event. It tells you who was considered the host and who was the guest, and that distinction matters when 2 shows have equal claim to the crossover. The writing credit lands exactly where you would expect. Man of Action, the collective of Joe Casey, Joe Kelly, Duncan Rouleau, and Stephen T.C. Siegel, who created both Ben 10 and Generator Rex at roughly the same time. The fact that the same 4 people held the creative keys to both worlds at the moment of crossover is not a coincidence. It is the only reason the crossover was possible in this form. Had either show changed hands or gone through a full creative reset before they met, the event would have been a negotiation between strangers. Instead, it reads like 2 friends showing up in each other's stories because that is literally what it was. The image that stays with me is the frame where they're standing side by side, Ben with the Omnitrix active on his wrist, Rex with the nanites humming in his arm, 2 systems built by the same 4 people now operating in the same physical space for the first time. 2 universes that had been parallel for 3 years were now overlapping inside a single broadcast written by the 4 people who had put them both there in the first place. Ben G. Gen 10. Something strange happened in April 2021. A reboot television special ended the reboot while simultaneously resurrecting the original series. The previous crossover placed 2 shows in a shared adventure, but Ben Gen 10 tried something far more complicated. It made a finale that was also a bridge. That contradiction, a story that ends and begins at the same time, is the whole point. Ben Gen 10 is a 2021 television special in the Ben 10 franchise, listed alongside 3 other television specials, Ben 10 through 10 and Alien X-Tinction from the 2021 cycle, alongside the earlier Heroes United special from 2011. It sits inside the Ben 10 reboot continuity, which ran from 2016 to 2021, a 5-year continuous run that spanned multiple seasons across that entire window. And here's the structural move that makes it different from the previous crossover. Instead of bringing in an outside franchise, it turned inward. The April 2021 specials for the reboot served as the series finale, and the crossover design chose to connect the classic and reboot continuities rather than close the reboot off entirely. 2 additional specials aired that April alongside Ben Gen 10. Ben 10 arrived as another 2021 television special a direct entry in the reboot continuity. Alien X-Tinction arrived as a second 2021 special, labeled alongside both Ben Gen 10 and Ben 10 Generator Rex, Heroes United in the official specials roster. Between them, these 4 titles form the closing argument for a continuity that had quietly been running for 5 years. And the crossover logic they deployed was consistent across the 4 specials in the franchise roster. The reboot had earned the right to absorb the classic timeline, not erase it. Here's where it gets strange. The 2021 April specials didn't just wrap up the reboot, they were designed to connect 2 continuities that had previously existed in parallel. The classic Ben 10 ran from 2005, spun off into Alien Force, Ultimate Alien, and Omniverse, while the reboot ran separately from 2016 to 2021 with its own rules, its own Omnitrix configuration, and its own character roster. After years of treating them as separate branches, the 2021 specials chose to fold the classic timeline into the reboot's finale rather than let both coexist. A skeptic would say that's just writing. Continuities get merged all the time in long-running franchises, so what makes this interesting? But the specific mechanism matters. Ben Gen 10 is listed as a Ben 10 franchise television special, not as a reboot exclusive, and the April specials collectively were given the job of connecting the 2 timelines rather than simply ending one. The finality of the reboot's 2021 conclusion is real, but the work it did to pull the classic continuity into its orbit before closing out made the reboot's ending a fork in the road rather than a dead end. The reboot finale is also an origin point, and that double function, closer and opener at once, is why Ben Gen 10 landed as a different kind of crossover than anything that came before it. But that same multi-continuity ambition had bigger implications than a single franchise's finale, and the next entry pushed the logic past Ben 10 entirely. Crossover Nexus. If the previous crossover merged 2 timelines inside a single franchise, this one treated the entire Cartoon Network universe as one shared continuity, and that escalation changes everything about how Ben 10 functions here. Crossover Nexus is the special crossover episode of OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, featuring Ben 10 listed as OKKO. Let's Be Heroes, episode 3/24. The premise is immediate and total. Ben Tennyson arrives in another dimension, forced to fight alongside characters from outside his own show, and the scope of that collision is where the real structure becomes visible. The episode places Ben 10 inside a mysterious pocket dimension alongside heroes from other Cartoon Network shows, a specific classification that ties the space directly to a previously established franchise. Within that space, Ben is described as one of the key characters who fought alongside KO, which positions him not as a visitor dropping in for a cameo, but as a primary participant in the episode's central conflict. The meta layer runs through a voice actor joke. The episode includes meta humor referencing the shared voice talent across Cartoon Network shows. That moment is played for laughs, but the underlying implication is that the episode is aware it's assembling a cast drawn from the same talent pool across multiple Cartoon Network properties. One small thing is true. This is an OKKO. Let's Be Heroes episode first, and Ben 10's appearance is framed as a crossover guest slot within that show's structure. That framing is accurate, it's also incomplete. The episode imagines the entire Cartoon Network universe within the same multiverse of heroes, and Dimension 2799813, the Generator Rex multiverse, is the mechanism that links Ben 10's world to the wider network. By placing the crossover inside an already established multiverse label, rather than treating it as a one-off dimension hop, the episode draws a clear line between this kind of crossover and the kind that came before. This isn't characters crossing into each other's stories, it's characters who already exist in a shared multiverse being placed in the same room. The facts force a single conclusion. Ben 10 is not just appearing in another show's episode here. The episode's own dimensional classification and the breadth of characters assembled make it clear that Ben 10 was being positioned as an existing member of a multiversal network that OKKO inhabited, not an outsider visiting for the first time. Minecraft. Minecraft crossed over with Ben 10 through an official DLC pack, letting players gather lost alien DNA, transform into powerful heroes, and help Ben, Gwen, and Grandpa Max defeat iconic villains. The official Minecraft X Ben 10 DLC pack adds Ben 10 content directly into the game as an official license collaboration. It is designed for Minecraft Bedrock Edition and is explicitly not affiliated with Mojang AB or Cartoon Network Studios. No corporate handshake, no cross-promotional deal, no official licensing arrangement of any kind. The mod ships with Ben 10 skins for Minecraft, an alien invasion map, and other Minecraft mods bundled as bonus content, all wrapped into a single Android package that a player can download without signing anything or agreeing to any partnership. The specific detail that separates this from a skin pack is how Ben Tennyson himself actually works inside the game. He spawns without an Omnitrix. Players must place it near him so he can pick it up and transform, meaning the mod doesn't just reskin a character. It recreates the core mechanic of the entire series as a literal, physical interaction with a placed object in the Minecraft world. The official DLC lets players put on the Omnitrix and transform into alien heroes to take on the alien invasion alongside Ben, Gwen, and Grandpa Max. HDM Studio could have stopped at reskins and called it a day. Instead, they rebuilt the Omnitrix's selection and transform loop using Minecraft's existing item interaction system. The reasonable explanation is that this is just a cosmetic mod. Skins slapped onto a popular game, the kind of fan project that appears and disappears without anyone noticing. That explanation holds right up until you try to use it. Players cannot select alien forms from a menu. They have to physically walk the Omnitrix to Ben Tennyson's spawn point to unlock each transformation. HDM Studio didn't just reskin Ben into Minecraft, they recreated the actual mechanic that defines the entire franchise without any official support, partnership, or guidance from Cartoon Network. The mod proves that Ben 10's core appeal, pick an alien, transform, use that form, is specific enough to carry itself in an entirely different game through a team that understood the source material well enough to rebuild its defining feature from scratch using only the tools already present in the game. Punchtime Explosion XL, an upgraded port of Cartoon Network. Punchtime Explosion arrived on Wii, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360 as a re-release of the original 2011 crossover fighting game developed by Papaya Studio and published by Crave Games, adding 8 new playable fighters for a total of 26 playable characters, with a large assist character roster unlocked through power-ups. With a North American release date of November 15, 2011, Ben Tennyson joined the roster as a playable character, and his Punchtime Explosion ultimate attack, activated by collecting 40 blue cubes, made him one of the most distinctive fighters in the game. A transformation introduced an Ultimate Alien, which was the currently airing series. Ben Tennyson was not included as a nostalgia pick or a default licensing placeholder. He was included as the version of the character the franchise was actively pushing in his most visually aggressive form. Why Ultimate Humongosaur specifically, and why now? Ultimate Humongosaur was the physical embodiment of everything Ben. Tier 10 Ultimate Alien was trying to communicate about its version of the character, bigger, stronger, more willing to escalate. His Punchtime Explosion attack, which transforms him mid-attack and blankets the entire stage with missiles in every direction, is not a subtle move. It fills the screen. It ends other fighters. It is exactly the kind of screen-filling damage output that matched how the character was being positioned in the show itself at that moment, and that specificity made Ben Tennyson's inclusion feel like a creative decision rather than a corporate obligation. The XL version's simultaneous expansion of the assist roster from 19 to 22, and addition of 8 new playable characters suggests Cartoon Network had enough confidence in Ben 10's brand weight by late 2011 to justify not just a spot on the roster, but a featured one. Ben Tennyson's Punchtime Explosion ultimate attack remains one of the most memorable moves in the game, because by 2011, that was exactly what Ben 10 looked like at its most explosive.